Cave Story. Watching that intro montage and hearing that sweet, sweet opening melody after all these years makes me feel old. Really old. Cave Story originally released in 2004, but I didn't get around to playing it until 2012, when it released in its 3D version on the 3DS. And you might be saying, damn, that 3D version sure looks ugly. I wonder if there's a Cave Story 2D. Fortunately for you, my genius level moron, one quick Google search and you won't just find a prettier version of the game, you'll quickly realize that this game is entirely, 100% certified free. And I ain't talking like App Store free, with ads and microtransactions, or swashbuckling Shiver Me Timbers free. I'm talking about straight up going to this dude's website and just downloading the game entirely for free. No catch. To my 13-year-old brain, this was a massive game changer. I was so used to having to ask for games because, they all cost money and you had to go to the store and shit.
Copy that.
The only free games in my periphery were goofy-ass MMOs, games which tended to lock some of the best parts behind paywalls and subscription fees, shit that was just not easy to sell to a parent. There was also like Adobe Flash Player games and like Cool Math. No. This was an authentic video game experience with about 6 to 10 hours of game time, which if you're a kid, you can stretch that shit out to infinity. It was entirely designed, coded, composed, written, and uploaded by one single human being, a Japanese fella by the name of
Amaya Daisuke.
Or just Pixel for short. The thing about Cave Story, though, is that underneath that simple presentation, the funny-looking, cutesy characters, and the seemingly innocent graphics and music, was a story about a cave.
Oh, brother!
Behind that adorable charade was a world filled with war, slavery, and lots of cold-blooded murder. And what does this Cave Story mean in the grand scheme of things? Why does it matter so much to gaming, and why does it matter so much to me? Why should you care? It's simple.
The game is fun.
So let's sit down and reminisce. We'll go through the major story beats and gameplay loops, and draw some examples as to why I think these one-man army games have revolutionized their own respective corners of the gaming sphere. If you've played this game, then I invite you to take a little bout of nostalgia with me, and if you haven't, don't plan to, and wouldn't mind listening to a whole-ass man-child talk about his favorite indie game, then sit back and enjoy, because this video is going to be garbage no matter what I say. But maybe, just maybe, I'll expand the mind of one person to take a look at Cave Story and to enjoy what this game had to offer back in 2004. Speaking of which, 2004 has got to be one of the most ridiculous years for gaming, period. Just look at a list of games that came out around this time and you'll see what I mean. At this time, the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox were about the end of their life cycles. Nintendo and Sony were about to introduce the next generation of handheld gaming with the DS and the PSP, and Microsoft had finally established themselves as a serious competitor to those Nihon giants with the Xbox. Not just on a console front, but also on the PC end, as internet cultures and PC gaming were flourishing full throttle. Over on the more software space, Rockstar comes out with one of the most famous video games ever, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Kind of a big deal. Microsoft comes out with Halo 2 and is the 4th highest selling game of that year. Kind of a big deal. Nintendo was still reeling from the not-so-success of the GameCube in 2004. Despite this, if Pikmin 2 and Paper Mario were considered failures in 2004, then I respectfully decline your opinion. My point is that the cultural output was insane across the board in 2004, and it didn't just stop at the home console front. Over on the PC front, Valve is coming out with Half-Life 2, Counter-Strike Source, which are gonna be a big deal in a couple years, just give it a second. Meanwhile, a little indie company called Blizzard Entertainment decides to send the MMO space into the stratosphere with World of Warcraft. Take a look at what gamers are actually playing in 2004. Look at what's trendy and hot. With the exception of Pokemon, most of these games are massive, open-world experiences with high-fidelity graphics and emphasis on multiplayer elements, or a strong presence in emergent gameplay experiences where the fun is in the shenanigans that you can get up to outside of any scripted or linear events. So when Daisuke Pixel Amaya decides to release his passion project in 2004, a 2D Metroidvania platformer that he started developing in 1999, It's clear that everything you see here is coming from a place of passion, heart, and love of the craft that is in no way an attempt for Pixel to pander to the general public and what gamer audiences were looking for at around this time, right? Gamer audiences were still capable of looking for and finding innovative, unique experiences, despite what the market was suggesting. Open world game? No. This is a 2D side-scrolling with instant loading screens. Emergent gameplay? Nope. It's a linear Metroidvania that doesn't even make use of that famous maze-like level designs that this genre is known for. What about high-fidelity graphics and music? Do beeps and boops work for you? Look, the point is that in 1999, GTA looked like this, alright? Pokemon looked like this, damn! And Halo? Halo looked like this. Oh, that's right, Halo didn't even fucking exist yet. So what if Cave Story looks and plays like an arcade game? There's more than enough gameplay and story to set this game apart from others of its kind. Some people, and by people I mean Wikipedia, they claim that Cave Story, quote, contributed to the resurgence of the Metroidvania genre. What does that mean, really? It's not like Cave Story invented Metroidvanias. I wouldn't go as far to say that they reinvented Metroidvanias. Symphony of the Night came out only a couple of years before Pixel started development on this game. That's the Vania part of Metroidvania, mind you, and it was a fully fledged AAA experience, released for major consoles, and was an incredible evolution of what the platformer could look like, sound like, be like. Presumably, Castlevania must have also sold pretty well, right? That's what publishers really care about. What's that? The game's initial commercial performance was mediocre? Particularly in the United States, where it was meagerly publicized, and only through positive critical reception and word of mouth did the game eventually become a hit? Huh, wonder if that'll ever happen again. Cave Story would, of course, develop its own cult following, with virtually no marketing behind Pixel's masterpiece. Word of mouth and fan translations allowed the game to prosper on the internet. It was literally the perfect time for Cave Story to release. The internet was still a wild west, brimming with potential. Pixel, taking advantage of a dying genre, showed that Cave Story, on its little lonesome, could still show that 2D games were innovative and fun, and that Metroidvanias were the ultimate way to express this genre, at least for the time being. The neat thing about Cave Story, though, is that it actually breaks away from some of the norms you might expect from Metroidvanias. Cave Story takes more inspiration from the Metroid half of Metroidvania, specifically the first Metroid game on the NES, as opposed to Super Metroid, which has really helped solidify some of the tropes that this genre became known for. This game is much more linear and has a big focus on platforming, which, depending on which Metroidvanias you look at in the present day, may actually not be a focus at all for the game's entirety. Hollow Knight, which I would consider to be the quintessential Metroidvania experience in the modern day, has a much bigger focus on combat than it does anything else, really. But it does have platforming. You know, it leaves room for gauntlet-style platforming towards the end of the game, in particular, and scattered throughout the many areas of the games. Being able to jump, dash, and land accurately is integral to the Cave Story experience, which is why it's important to acknowledge the fact that platforming remains an important aspect of this Metroidvania-style game, even though that might not be the same story for other games of its genre. While we're on the topic of Metroidvanias, Cave Story isn't as generous with upgrades as something like Super Metroid is. You'll consistently be getting new weapons, health upgrades, and story-related items, but these items don't carry as much value or weight as the many upgrades you'll find in a game like Metroid Dread, for instance, which bombards you with new upgrades and movement options throughout the whole game. Traversal options in Cave Story are fairly limited compared to these games, right? Backtracking to find hidden secrets and upgrades that you couldn't before, it's like 90% of Ori and the Blind Forest, right? You're not expected to return to any of the earlier levels in Cave Story, outside of story reasons. Why? Well, because usually you can get every upgrade you might find on the first run through a level. Well, actually, that's a lie. Cave Story does let you find an upgrade to the first gun that you use if you're able to find the jetpack towards the late game. So there are exceptions, but it's not consistent, like a game like Ori and the Blind Forest, right? Cave Story doesn't waste your time. It's not even that lengthy of a playthrough. Like I said before, a full playthrough might take you less than 10 hours. Definitely 5 if you've already played the game before. What I'm trying to say, though, is that after that long-ass ramble, right, is that Cave Story revitalizing the Metroidvania genre would imply that other games took inspiration from Cave Story to build their own thing, right? That Cave Story really legitimately left a tangible impact and legacy that other games have emulated since. Cave Story doesn't really have that. Just take weapons and combat as an example. Killing enemies in Cave Story is as simple as clicking a button and shooting them till they're dead. Not rocket science. When enemies die, they drop experience. Okay, that's not that new either. Gathering experience levels up whatever gun you're holding in that moment. Huh? Okay, so this is sort of new, right? So if you pick up experience with the basic weapon that you start with, you'll eventually level up that gun and it gets stronger. Neat. Now, killing an enemy with that weapon, then switching to your rocket launcher, for instance, lets you pick up experience and level up the rocket launcher instead. So that's kind of neat. You don't have to waste rocket ammo to level it up. You just kill it with one gun, switch over, level it up. Instant. But wait, there's more. Taking any sort of damage will cause you to lose experience, kind of like how Sonic drops all his rings when he gets hit. You can't pick up all your rings though. Once you get hit in Cave Story, you have to go back and kill more enemies to level up your weapons again. Now, the consequence of this is that getting hit also takes your health, so taking damage in this game is doubly as punishing since you'll lose health and weapon XP, which is particularly bad in a boss fight where you won't have the opportunity to go back and kill enemies, right? Getting hit in a boss fight means you're kind of stuck with that amount of XP for the rest of the fight. Losing more DPS as the fight goes on, the more you get hit, that's kind of unique to Cave Story. You don't really see that in a lot of games, if any. This whole system, which I've just described, does not seem to exist in any of the Metroidvanias that I've played or that have come after Cave Story. It exists in its own little Cave Story bubble. Not that that's a bad thing, but it is an example of a tangible aspect of Cave Story that, as far as I know, doesn't exist in other games. It's unique. So, what did Cave Story do for Metroidvanias, right? Why is it seen as so important and influential? And why does that matter? Is it the story? Well, let's take a look at it. See, it's unusual for platformers, and especially indie platformers, to offer this much agency in how the story can play out. And for a game called Cave Story, it's still surprising to find out that that story is central to the experience. Now, what do I mean by agency? Well, we'll get to that. You play as Quote, an amnesiac robot that seemingly wakes up in a cave within a cave, oblivious to the events before you wound up there. Quote quickly manages to find his way into a village of rabbit people, known as the Mimigas. They're having a bit of a crisis at the moment, and it seems that a group of humans have invaded their ecosystem and have started kidnapping some of the inhabitants of this Mimiga village. One of those humans, a girl named Sue, seems to be hiding somewhere in the village, but a young Mimiga girl named Toroko is protecting her for some reason. Shortly after confronting Toroko, you're both ambushed by a giant lunchbox and his companion, a young witch named Misery. And Toroko is subsequently kidnapped. Arnar. Your goal now is to find Sue and trade her for Toroko, and thus your adventure becomes directly tied to the fate of Sue, the Mimigas, and the mysterious figure known as the Doctor, who seems to be pulling the strings behind this human invasion. Now, I don't want to bore you with the specifics of the game's story, but I will say this. If you play this game completely blind, knowing absolutely nothing about it beforehand, you'll likely screw yourself out of the true ending and the final challenges that await you at the game's end. This isn't a matter of difficulty. This comes back to that mention of agency that I was talking about, right? The checks that allow you to access the true final boss and conclusion of the story are all connected to decisions that you make in the story. Decisions that are ultimately a 0 or a 1, right? A yes or a no, but decisions nonetheless, many of which are unreasonable and illogical unless you know better. Let me give you an example. Okay, Curly Brace is a character that shows up around the middle of the game. She's just like you in a lot of ways, an amnesiac robot suddenly caring for defenseless Mimigas. Naturally, she becomes close friends with you, helping you make your way through the game after the Mimiga children that she was protecting are mercilessly killed by Misery, Because Cave Story doesn't give a single fuck about wanton acts of murder and cruelty, no matter how adorable the victims might be. It's implied that Toaster Man over here kills a couple of puppies too. Tasteful! Turns out the cave you're in is actually a floating island, so you make your way to the core of this floating island with Curly Brace at your side. When you take down the core of the island, the room will suddenly flood. Not knowing what the fuck you do, you succumb to your fate, and then last minute, Curly Brace saves your life, and you can do nothing but stare at her corpse as you're whisked away, unable to repay the debt that you now owe to Curly Brace. Let's rewind for a second. The first time you meet Curly Brace, she offers to trade you her machine gun for your rackety ass pistol. Any self-respecting gamer ages 1 to 100 will probably think, pistol, machine gun, pistol, machine gun, obviously I'll take the machine gun. It even lets you fly around. So you take the machine gun, right? Wrong! Doing this kills Curly Brace permanently for the rest of the game. There is nothing you can do once you make this decision except for undoing your save or exiting immediately before you save and making sure you keep that pistol. Old Man Jenkins, who gives you the jetpack you'll need to unlock the true ending of the game. He falls from the sky at some random ass point in the game, and you'd think naturally, an old man just fell from the sky. He seems to be stuck down a hole. I better go down there and see if he's okay, right? Wrong! Doing so kills him. You're meant to leave him to die so that he picks himself up by his bootstraps and gives you the finished jetpack much later in the game. It's these sort of random, unexpected choices that end up causing catastrophic consequences for the game's story and your save file. And only by picking the opposite choice you would think you needed to make will you actually be able to fight Ballos in the true final fight of the game. Just saving Curly Brace is enough if you actually do go through the hassle of not getting the machine gun and avoiding Mr. Old Man Jenkins over here. You'll still have to progress through an entire side quest dedicated to restoring her memory. Just fucking up at one step of this process once again bars you from the true ending. This is the only point of the game where you'll actually need to go back and backtrack through areas that you've already been to restore her memories, which is unusual for the rest of the game, but it's necessary. You can save her life in the game, but if you don't go through with her restoring her memories, you'll still be locked out of the true ending. And I've been saying true ending quite a bit, which implies the existence of untrue endings, right? Or just other endings, like a bad ending, for instance, where you fly off into the distance with Sue's brother Kazama on a green dragon, living in the mountains while the Doctor takes over the world with rabid people? Rabid people, okay. The normal ending, you manage to escape the island, but are unable to save the Mimigas or Curly Brace from their demise. Feels like every ending is bittersweet in some way, unless you're able to get that true ending. So, yeah, you'll want to go through with it. The music is upbeat and cheery, the art is cute and bright, and many of the characters rarely take a chance to put you down and make you feel hopeless. Balrog, Sue, Curly, they all cheer you on, even though one of those is a villain for most of the game. I don't fucking know what Balrog is supposed to be, but he's great. I love him despite the whole puppy murder. It's just that despite that cheery, wholesome atmosphere, Daisuke Amaya shamelessly implements plenty of moments for unexpected cruelty. And that shit stuck with me, man. It made me feel something, right? Especially at a young age. I didn't expect for games to be this dark. There's the whole point in the game, right? Where you'll go to this pink Mimiga's house. And if you go to her house, 3 hours into the game, you're not that committed yet. Investigate her fireplace. You're trying to get through to her house, right, to get to the other side. And you decide, oh shit, my health is low, I better take a nap. So you just jump on her bed, go to sleep. You'll wake up with this little bunny girl right next to you, asleep as well. You'll be like, whoa, what the fuck just happened? Check your inventory, and her fucking lipstick is in your inventory, right? You just woke up from a bed with a bunny girl at your side and lipstick in your inventory. What the fuck did Pixel mean by this?
Oh, you touch my tra-la-la.
Alright y'all, I've given you the broad strokes of Cave Story from gameplay to story, but I ultimately want to answer that question that I posed earlier in the video.
What did Cave Story do for Metroidvanias, right? Why is it seen as so important and influential?
I also argued earlier that Cave Story does not have any particular game mechanic that's made its way to other games since 2004. Instead, what I think Cave Story's truest, bestest contribution to gaming was that it proved that even one person can handle all the different aspects of a game and craft something wholly intended by the author. In other words, it's not just possible for a game to be solo devved, but more often than not, the solo developer gives the game a unique identity and taste, thanks to the fact that it all comes from one brain. No counsel, no back and forth feedback or community voted shenanigans. One dude, or dudette, a great idea, and the skills to put it all together. It democratized modern game development, and what I'm trying to say with that is that after Cave Story, we started to see waves and waves of games developed by just one person, so it showed that it can be done, that you can go in and make a game on your own. Suddenly, anybody could do it. Not always were these solo games instant classics, mind you. Most of them suck Waka Flocka dick, but there would be a consistent few that turned the internet upside down. Remember, games at this point were heading into that bigger is better territory. Bigger graphics, bigger worlds, bigger stories, and bigger budgets. Cave Story dismantled that idea at a time when it started to wane. Now, I don't want to mislead anybody. Cave Story is not the first game to be developed by one guy. No, sir. Classic arcade games of the 80s and mega hits like Tetris have been going solo dev for ages, but these games are old and were obviously much easier to make back then than Cave Story's sum of all its parts. I also don't doubt that Cave Story's cult status has waned over the years, with games like Undertale, Return of the Obra Dinn, and Stardew Valley largely overshadowing Cave Story in recent years. Yet, I would argue, till the day I die, that Cave Story was fundamental in the 2000s for showing game devs around the world that yes, it could be done. You can make great modern video games all by yourself, and that doing so might even generate more success than had you gone with a large publisher or a small team.